Hello there and welcome to our look ahead to what the papers will be bringing us tomorrow. With me, a Pippa Crerar of the London Evening Standard newspaper and the comedian and writer David Schneider. Let's have a look at some of tomorrow morning's front pages now. And we're going to start with The Independent. It's leading with, unsurprisingly, all the floods and a picture there of the swollen River Thames in Surrey and the Prime Minister's warning that the situation is likely to get worse before it gets any better. The Financial Times features the news that Barclays is to cut thousands of jobs in the UK, saying the bank's chief executive is on the back foot over his decision to boost bonuses. It's back to the floods on the Daily Telegraph's front page, which leads with David Cameron's pledge that the government would spend whatever is necessary on rebuilding affected areas. That's also the top story on the front page of the Metro, with its own take on the Prime Minister's comments, a message from 10 Downing Street. And The Guardian is focused on the Prime Minister's flood funding pledge there too. And the Mail's front page is dedicated to its own petition to divert money from foreign aid to flood victims here in the UK. We're going to start, obviously, with the flooding. That's the story of the day, the story of the week, the story of the decade, it seems so far. The Independent, Pippa, Britain's water torture, here to stay until May. I mean, you know, no matter how much money you throw at this thing, if the water's not going to go away, it's going to be a nightmare for a long, long time. That's
another few months, isn't it? When you consider we've already had the wettest January since records began, it doesn't really bode very well for springtime for most of us, and in particular for those people who obviously live close to the Thames and other rivers. The Independent's actually warning that the Severn and the Wye are the latest rivers that the officials or the Environment Agency et al. Are keeping their eye on because waters are rising. So we've had 1,000 people having to be evacuated from their homes, or their homes being flooded in the last few days. Looks like over the next few months we could see many, many more. And the picture in the Independent is very striking. It looks like a lake, where actually the Thames used to weave through Shepperton and Surrey. The whole area is completely flooded. What I think is going to be interesting is that, as you say, we've had days and days of the floods leading the newspapers. Normally we get to the point in newspapers where story fatigue takes over and they'll feel the need to break into something else. But if we've got months of pictures like this and stories like this coming up, then how can we ignore it?
Keep going.
Yeah, these are the readers. You know, I mean, this is a cynic might say, right, that Cameron, you know, he's said now let's stop the blame game, mainly because he was starting to get the blame. He's stopped saying Cobra all the time, and he's actually come out and started to do something. And cynics might say it's because now we're seeing pictures of Shepperton and Surrey, that we're seeing the sort of home counties that are vulnerable. But I mean, to talk about these sort of pictures until May, if that is your house, that is a terrifying prospect.
Absolutely terrifying. And of course, I mean, a lot of these communities, they've not just been inundated with water today, but inundated with MPs.
Flooded. Flooded. They've had to put out sandbags to keep out Miliband and Pat, all of them. It's been terrifying. But that's been a very difficult balancing act. I mean, especially for David Cameron, like how much I felt last few days he has been trying to make politics about it, making about the decisions about dredging. It's not our cuts, it's the dredging that was the problem, the lack of dredging. And I think he's now realised that, well, it's not about politics. And yet people are still out there doing politics and getting heckled. It's like they're almost like punch bags. They're, you know, Miliband and what have you. They're going punch bag and they're taking the abuse,
taking the blows.
And there's infighting within his own party as well, which can't have helped things. What I was really struck by today was some of the stories, some of the TV footage mostly of individuals who've been affected, saying we don't care about the politics of this. I don't care if Owen Paterson's fallen out there at Pickles over this. I don't care about Chris Smith at the Environment Agency, whether he should have his job or not. What I care about is the fact that the help's not getting through now, and I need it.
Which is why Cameron is trying to be the responsible adult, rising above it all and saying, look, all that matters is sorting the situation out now. I mean, David, for instance, Daily Telegraph. Mr. Cameron says, money is no object to end the flooding misery. So, you know, if it takes gazillions, he's willing to spend it.
Isn't it interesting that suddenly we have gazillions? I mean, I think that this is indicative of the short-termism of this government, in my view, in that, like, they have cut and cut and cut, and cutting is great and having a small state is great until something like this happens. There's cuts with the Environment Agency, limits on what they could spend, because we've got to, you know, there's austerity, we've got to look up, we haven't got the money, and what that means is that suddenly you're faced with a real disaster where it's a false economy. You have to put out more than you would have done had you prepared.
Yeah, there is definitely the argument, why didn't you spend the money in the first place if money money genuinely is no object. But
it's no object now.
Yeah, well,
it just wasn't before.
Because there wasn't any flooding before.
Yeah.
But I interpret this as being a response to UKIP and Nigel Farage, who was obviously calling for some of the £11 billion foreign aid budget, which I think the Mail splashed on again, to be diverted to help
people. Does this shoot
who
the Mail down?
Does this shoot? Does he? I think he's attempting to. I think he's saying that this isn't it's not a fair comparison. We've got the money to be able to afford. We're a wealthy country. We can afford, austerity or not, we can afford to build flood defences and help out local businesses and people, even householders who haven't been insured are going to get some help. These hardship funds are apparently going to be boosted, local council hardship funds, and I will see about that because obviously they've been sucked dry over recent years. So they're claiming the money's there, and that they don't need to get into the foreign aid budget. And really, I mean, I think we were talking about this earlier. I think a lot of the comparison between floods we see in Bangladesh, for example, where thousands, tens of thousands of people die, lose their homes and livelihoods, and awful though these floods are in Somerset and along the Thames Valley, it's just on a different scale. And I think most sensible people can see that and would recognise that you don't need to tap into that foreign aid budget. We've got enough money here to be able to deal with the problem. All
right, I mean, onto the front page of The Guardian. PM's high-stakes flood pledge, David. Unlimited funds for flood relief, says Cameron. Army marches in, but apparently they forgot their wellies as well. It's not just Owen Paterson that does that. Yeah,
I mean, I think it is a high-stakes pledge because he's saying money is no object. And where does that leave him?
Stop, actually,
where does it stop? I mean, I suppose there is a problem that no amount of money can stop the floods. But then again, that's why I think it's all very well pledging this and dealing with UKIP and dealing with the Daily Mail and dealing with the political exigencies of having to tell people, I'm here, I'm your Prime Minister. But it's indicative of the lack of planning of this government and it's indicative of the fact that they haven't addressed climate change, which that is the planning that we should be looking at. I mean, I see that he dodged the opportunity to discuss climate change because he has an Environment Secretary who is a climate change denier, as I'm sure King Canute had an Environment Secretary who was a tide coming in denier. But so I think there's the wider issues, not just the knee-jerk response.
Okay, so Pippa, should he have said the money, whatever money is needed, it will be there, rather than a blank cheque, rather than unlimited funds? I mean, has he just chosen the wrong words to sort of sell this response?
Possibly, but I think that he is wary because of his, as I'm sure you'll remember, his reaction to the floods in 2007 when he was in Rwanda with his shadow cabinet, and his constituency was deluged with water, and he didn't come back immediately.
Right.
And he remembers that he got a real battering over that, compared with Gordon Brown, who obviously was Prime Minister at that point, who was, I think it was days or weeks after he took over as Prime Minister. And his response to the floods crisis at that point and making money available at that point was seen as being one of the 2 or 3 things which really bolstered his leadership, his prime ministership early on, and he did a massive bounce in the polls. That obviously went subsequently. But Cameron will be remembering what happens if you don't be seen to lead from the front. And it may have taken him a few days to get there.
Well, it's taken him a few weeks. I think the consensus is among many people and within the government itself that they haven't really got on top of this soon enough.
I think that's his style, though. Quite often, it's sort of like backs to the wall. It's like let's not tackle the crisis until we absolutely have to.
Sure.
And but when it actually reaches a sort of a crisis point and you realise you have to act, he throws everything at it, and it appears like the elder statesman and comes in and takes over and is calm and collected and runs this new cabinet committee which is being set up, and money is no object and all the rest of it. I mean, whether the readers, the voters, the people who are affected by the floods see it quite the same way, or whether they think that actually he should have got his act together a lot sooner.
Yes, I wonder what the people of Somerset feel about this new macho Cobra man that's coming out and sorting it out, and money's no object now, and because they have been flooded for 5-6 weeks.
Yes.
And it's all very well of us saying the last few days he's really got kicked into gear, but this has been going on for a long time.
It didn't make the papers initially. I mean, it's only really been sort of like the last week or two that Somerset levels flooding has been on the front pages. I mean, it wasn't in the lead story in the BBC. It wasn't the front page of the newspapers. So it's not just the politicians who've been slow to catch up. Although it is their job, of course, to
keep on top of things,
exactly.
because I mean, you could argue the Somerset levels floods every year. I mean, it does.
Yeah.
It's just a question of it's scale, exactly. It's the continuing effect of all these storms blowing in from the Atlantic. The Metro, David, message from 10 Downing Street. Apparently there's a shark in these waters. There's a shark in these waters.
Well, I wonder if there's a connection between the Metro's ability to come up with a pun every day and how long the flood. When they've run out of puns, we'll see the floodwaters recede, I suspect, and the picture of the shark here. But yeah, I mean, it's floods everywhere, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely everywhere. All right, let's finally go on to the Financial Times. Barclays chief on back foot over bonuses and job cuts. They're cutting a lot of jobs at Barclays, and yet the bonuses have gone up.
I know, it's wearingly familiar, is it not? I mean, the number of times we sat here and discussed banks paying out huge bonuses. I mean, I think their bonus pot is the total incentive awards granted this year to
2.38 billion.
Yes, and that's up since last year. And as you say, at the same time, 12,000 jobs are being cut. And the profits that they're paying out, the dividends that they're paying out to shareholders are down too. And it's just brought back the whole question of bonuses and whether individuals should be rewarded for success or failure, as it appears in this case.
Clearly, David, money's no object here, too.
Well, isn't that just the weird thing when I think Anthony Jenkins, the Barclays chief, is probably the one man desperately doing a rain dance at the moment, because this would be a big splash in all the papers
if it were all the flooding.
No pun intended with the splash word, but so I think he's very pleased about that. But it's it is wearingly familiar, and also when you think about the sum involved and how that could help with the flooding effort, some of that, do a bank another.
That's an interesting point.
He's got a reputation. His nickname in the city is Saint Anthony, so he has a chance to keep his halo gilded.
All right, Pippa, John, David, you're going to be back in an hour's time to look at some more of the headlines on the front pages. So stay with us for that. But at the top of the hour, coming up at 11 o'clock, we're going to have much more on all the flooding problems there around the country. The very latest from our correspondents on the ground. But now, BBC News, it's time for Sports Day. Hello there, and welcome back to our look ahead to what the papers will be bringing us tomorrow. With me, our Pippa Crerar of the London Evening Standard newspaper and the comedian and writer David Schneider. Pretty much all the front pages are in now. Let's have a look at some of them. And we're going to start with The Independent. It's leading with, not surprisingly, the flood situation, with a picture there of the swollen River Thames in Surrey. And the Prime Minister's warning that the situation is likely to get worse before it gets any better. The Financial Times features the news that Barclays is to cut thousands of jobs in the UK, saying the bank's chief executive is on the back foot over his decision to boost bonuses. It's back to the floods on the Daily Telegraph front page, which leads with David Cameron's pledge that the government would spend whatever is necessary on rebuilding those areas that have been affected. That's also the top story on the front page of the Metro, with its own take on the Prime Minister's comments, a message from 10 Downing Street. The Guardian has focused on the Prime Minister's flood funding pledge, while the Mail's front page is dedicated to its own petition to divert money from foreign aid to flood victims in the UK. The Daily Express is warning that a new Atlantic superstorm will cause 24 hours of near nationwide chaos once it hits. And The Sun is leading on its own efforts to help with the relief effort. All the papers trying to sort of get involved in raising money and doing what they can. David, the front page of The Guardian, PM high-stakes flood pledge. Number 10 has now had to admit that he didn't mean to say 1,600 troops. He meant to say 600 troops.
Yes, so that's good. I mean, what's 1,000 troops between friends when it comes to actually dealing with the crisis? I think that doesn't go with the sort of "it's all right, everyone, I'm here now, I'm looking after things now" image that he's tried to put across today, and that we see in the papers. It is a high-risk strategy. I mean, I suppose the last few days have been him moving away from the blame game, saying let's not play the blame game, because a lot of the reason was he was getting a lot of blame. Coming away from this Cobra posturing and actually trying to do something. But it is, as the Guardian points out, a very high stakes manoeuvre because he has said money is no object in this relief effort. Suddenly there's no austerity. Suddenly it's all right. And for me, It bothers me that there's so much short-termism with this government. Money was an object. There were cuts to the Environment Agency. There was limits on what they could have spent. And if they'd maybe been more forward planning, then we wouldn't be in the situation where we have to spend a lot more money to deal with it.
But it is a dreadful situation out there. Many people have lost their homes to these floodwaters. It's going to take a lot of money. Didn't he have to say what he said today?
Yeah, well, I mean, the Guardian's right. It's high stakes for the victims, but it's also his response is high stakes politically. And it was very important what he said today because his leadership has started to come into question. That's
what today's about, isn't it? It's about him having to show that he's in control.
It's establishing that he is in charge and that he's capable of leading and cancelling the trip to the Middle East, and he's going to chair this new cabinet committee, which is going to be there for the long haul to see through the next couple of months of tackling the flooding. I mean, David Cameron will be scarred by what happened in 2007 when he was Conservative Party leader, but he was off in Rwanda with his shadow cabinet when floods hit his own constituency, and he didn't come back, or at least didn't come back immediately. He was criticised for that at the time. And at the same time, Gordon Brown, who was Prime Minister, who'd just become Prime Minister, received all sorts of plaudits for his firm handling and statesmanlike approach, and actually got a boost in the polls. Didn't last long, but got a boost in the polls on the back of it. And Cameron will be very aware that it's crises like this on which politicians' reputations are made or broken.
And yet, if you live in Somerset, it looks like he's instantly sprung into action after 5 weeks. And that's the problem. That now we're seeing pictures which are very, very distressing of people in Berkshire and Surrey, home counties.
Tory heartland.
Yes, and suddenly, I mean, it must feel, if you are on the Somerset levels, it must feel like, oh well, now there's money's available because it's actually hitting closer to home.
Sure. I mean, the Sun, as hurricanes sweep in.
Yeah, didn't hear about that on the weather.
No, I didn't hear that either.
Anything's possible.
Come on, Sun. Well, anything's possible with the Sun, I suppose.
It's a great opportunity, though, for them to be the readers' champions. Although, where are the bikinis? Surely with a bit of water there. Maybe it's a bit chilly
this is the front page. We don't know what's...
You're so cynical.
Sorry.
Let's not turn to page 3. Yeah. Operation Sunbags. We deliver defences in flood zones. Iraq hero to head up rescue effort. I mean, this is an opportunity for the Red Tops. I don't know what the Mirror's got on the front page, actually. And, of course, the Mail has its own campaign in relation to all this. I mean, this is where the media sort of, or at least the popular tabloid press can get involved on a very sort of personal level.
Yes, absolutely, and readers love that sort of engagement. The Sun is very good at getting out and getting involved, launching this sort of, whether it's a rescue operation or whether it's fundraising, Help for Heroes, for example, and particularly with a good old Iraq hero heading up the rescue effort, just as well, really, given that we've underestimated or overestimated the number of troops that are involved by 1,000. So the Sun's going to step into the breach.
Hopefully, the general knows how many troops are there. But it's
the brigadier.
Or the brigadier. Yeah. But it's interesting because the flood-affected areas are having to deal with floods of MPs as well. I'm sure they're welcoming the sunbags, but it's also like they've been inundated today and the last few days with MPs.
Okay, roll call today. Nigel Farage,
Philip Hammond,
the Prime Minister, Ed Miliband, and every single local MP from every single one of these areas who need to be seen to be doing something for their constituents.
I think Cameron had a luminous jacket, which I think gives him the edge on the fashion parade of what was going on. But everyone was out there trying to...
You do wonder how welcome they actually were. I mean, I know that they feel they need to be seen, but if you were in houses flooded and suddenly you were overcome as well by a visiting politician, a string of media, some officials, some health and safety.
Philip Hammond got it in the neck.
Ed Miliband got asked to leave a public meeting, didn't he? So admittedly by the wife of a Tory mayor, but nevertheless, I think you would actually just be a bit fed up and saying, actually, guys, give us your money, give us your support, but we don't need you here for a photo opportunity.
Would we rather have the military coming to help us or Ed Miliband? Oh, I don't know. It's true.
On to the Independent. Britain's water torture here to stay until May. I mean, David Schuckman's piece on the 10 o'clock news tonight, it was talking about the boreholes and the aquifers underneath the ground being so saturated with water that even if there was no rain tomorrow, and there is going to be rain tomorrow, or rain for the next sort of month or so, there's still going to be flooding because there's so much water underneath the ground.
And the additional problem with groundwater, obviously, is that there's the minute it gets contaminated with sewage, which is happening quite a lot.
Yes, it is.
I mean, you've seen these pictures of these
nasty.
kids splashing around in the streets, thinking it's a right jolly old laugh, got a day off school, all the rest of it. And you're thinking, guys, what are you splashing around in?
Yeah.
I mean, that's when you start to get to the public health issue, and that's obviously something they're going to have to watch very, very carefully.
Yeah, a very powerful picture in the Independent. But you just wonder whether, I mean, we're blaming Lord Smith, we're blaming government cuts, but is this climate change, and should it be addressed? I mean, we have an Environment Secretary who is a climate change denier, and you just wonder how much king canuting, I had to say that very carefully, how much king canuting can go on before you realise that something has to be done in the long term. And we've got a government here who wants to get rid of the green stuff, wants to cut that, and you just wonder whether we need, which is so difficult when there's this election coming up, we need a longer term thinking about
a strategy. And what one wonders, Pippa, if money's no object, this blank check that is now suddenly out there, if that is for flood defences in the future, is that just for these regions down in the south and the west and southwest that have been affected, or is it going to go to Hull, who had dreadful flooding, last year and the year before and the year before?
That's right. Well, they're claiming that it's for the flood defences. It's for the repair work to take place now, and also households which were uninsured are going to get support as well. There's going to be extra support for councils' hardship funds, which have been depleted in recent times, but they're going to be a source of income for those who are most at need, the flood-stricken areas. And then there's going to be extra support for businesses as well, which obviously suffer too. So, I mean, it depends how you define short and long term. I mean, that will help in the sort of the months ahead. But as David says, surely we should be looking at the years ahead, because these incidents, I don't think the severity is necessarily getting any more serious. Obviously, it was like 1948, was it? There was the huge floods then, but we've had incidents of major flooding in this country before, but the frequency of them is definitely increasing, and it's something we can't just react to when they happen. We do need to have some sort of long-term planning in place.
Daily Mail, 100,000. That's how many people in just one day signed the Mail's petition calling for foreign aid cash to go to British flood victims. The problem, I suspect, could be, David, that this petition was put out there and people signed this before the Prime Minister said, actually, we've got tons of cash. We've got loads of cash. In fact, it's a blank check.
Yeah, it could be that, or it could be just that this bandwagon is a great bandwagon. It seems...
To flog papers.
Yeah, it seems appealing that, well, let's take money from, look after yourself at home first, that charity starts at home, etc. But of course, what you're really doing is taking money from very, very desperate people to very desperate people. I'm not negating the desperate situation that people are in this country, but there's people in desperate situations in the other country. And incidentally, today there was also the headline about Barclay bonuses and these massive bonus for Barclays, and no doubt the chief of Barclays is presently doing a rain dance just to keep that headline away from the papers. But I'd far rather see some of those bonuses skimmed off in a tax and put towards the people in desperate need in this country, rather than people in desperate need in other countries losing out.
I mean, the foreign aid budget, it is a big issue for a lot of people, though.
It is, and the Mail has been campaigning for a long time, not just in relation to the floods, but to have the £11 billion foreign aid budget cut, and loves stories about Indian space programs and supporting Caribbean islands, which used to be incredibly poor and are now very wealthy and huge tourist resorts, and the anachronistic spending that sometimes goes on, which is actually being dealt with by DFID now. So this is kind of like the latest step, and that's a great excuse for the Mail to say, look, here we go again. Here's all this money being wasted, as they would say, when actually it should be, or some of it should be diverted to go to people at home. So it's part of the ongoing Mail campaign. But I have to say, I think it's a false choice, and I think that there is room and there is money to support people in places like bits of sub-Saharan Africa and Bangladesh, if we're talking flooding, as well as helping people who are struck by flooding at home.
Which is exactly what the Prime Minister said, has been saying in response to criticism of the foreign aid budget and the current floods here. On to the Times. Actually, no, we're going to go to the Metro. Just to quickly show this picture. There's a shark in there, David. A message from 10 Downing Street.
Yes, I was just saying earlier that I think that the floods will probably last as long as the Metro has puns every day to express them.
It actually says underneath the picture there, Fins can only get better.
Dear, I missed that.
Yeah, I missed that too.
Yeah.
I'm glad I said that.
But yeah, there you are. That's,
all right, okay. But let's head on to the Daily Telegraph. No, actually, no, we're going to go to the Times. Truth about Plebgate by number 10 duty officer. Mitchell is abusive, but Met chiefs betrayed us, say a key witness, Pippa.
Yeah, this is interesting. This is one of the 4 officers on duty when Andrew Mitchell made his fated journey out of Downing Street that night many months ago. And so it's first-hand testimony. He's gone on the record, a chap called Ian Richardson, who subsequently retired, I should say, from the Met with an exemplary conduct record. And what's interesting about this is that he repeats the allegation that he believed that Mr. Mitchell called the officers plebs, and as claimed by one of his colleagues in the original police log. And what this means is that it's just not going to go away.
No.
It's yet another officer. Previously, one of the officers was discredited and actually jailed for making up a witness statement. But here's another witness alleging that actually those comments were made. Andrew Mitchell's attempts to move on with his life and his political career have hit another stumbling block. Whether this will delay it for long or not, his reincarnation, I don't know. But he won't be pleased to see this front page tomorrow morning.
No. I mean, it does make you wonder what the morale is within the police force. That there's so much confrontation within parts of the police force. This officer saying that he's accusing the Diplomatic Protection Group of leaking the log, and there must be so much tensions within the police force that must really affect morale, let alone the trust that people feel about the police.
Yeah.
And how can we trust them? Who can we trust?
And Met Commissioner Bernard Hogan-Howe tried to draw a line under all of this last week. And here it is again. It's just rumbling on and on and on.
Yeah. Let's go to the Telegraph. Actually, David, economy is not strong enough to support a rate rise, warns Carney.
Yes, this is interesting because Mark Carney was meant to. When there was sense when he arrived that it was all going to change, and now we got someone who's got a firm hand on the tiller and knows what he was doing. And then he said that that interest rates wouldn't go up. He wouldn't put them up until the jobless unemployment comes down below 7%, which it's basically heading there, very close. So people are getting worried, and so now he's having to backtrack and say, no, I didn't mean that. and I think for me, it's possibly that the government has been too good with their sleight of hand with the jobless. The problem now isn't so much joblessness as people with not earning enough from jobs.
Right.
So although technically the figures are coming down, and there's still the economy is in trouble. We've got hardly working people.
Okay. So you're saying the government's brought unemployment down too quickly?
In my world of lefty conspiracies, what I'm saying is that they've been too good.
Are you a lefty? I'm shocked. What are you doing on the BBC?
I know. I'm giving more ammunition to those that say.
I know. We're going to get bashed now.
Yeah,
Thank you for that.
Fault.
Thanks, David. Anyway, Pippa, David, you've been brilliant tonight. Thank you very much indeed for looking at some of the stories behind the headlines. Many thanks for that. Stay with us here on BBC News, because at the top of the hour we're going to have much more on the flooding crisis. David Cameron has pledged that money is no object, so stay with us for that. But now on BBC News, it's time for Sports Day.